How's it going, folks? Back for episode 16 of the Popcorn Square podcast titled In a Galaxy Far, Far Away. And we're going to be talking about sci-fi films today. We'll touch on shows a little bit as well. First topic is going to be discussing some of our favorite sci-fi films. I'll run through a couple of my list, go through some details later. I'm actually going to skip Dune because we talk about Dune a lot. Yeah. We'll talk about Dune. We'll have a whole episode dedicated to the new Dune coming out in March. If you haven't watched the first one, please go watch that. But I'm going to go into Event Horizon, Interstellar, the Star Wars storyline, right? Cinematic storyline, that is. Blade Runner 2049, The Creator, Oblivion, War of the Worlds, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. So that's my list. I have all these listed for different reasons, of course. Event Horizon is more of a sci-fi horror. Interstellar is more of just like kind of sci-fi fantasy exploration that's done by Nolan. Matthew McConaughey was starring in that. One of my favorite sci-fi movies of all time, just very relatable to me. And I really like how Nolan shot that film and how he used a lot of practical effects. It wasn't a lot of CG. If I believe Nolan said he didn't use any CG in that movie. So yeah, a lot of practical there. Great film. Anybody that hasn't seen that, go watch that. Star Wars, I don't need to speak on Star Wars much. I want to see what Disney does with the new trilogy they got going. Kind of in the shadows right now. They haven't come up with a script. I know they signed on Daisy Ridley recently to star in the next Star Wars trilogy that they got going on there. Blade Runner 2049, beautiful movie, beautiful visually, and the score was awesome. And I talked about Blade Runner before. 2049 is a movie that you can watch and you will not be lost. In regards to the events of the first Blade Runner. So I thought that just really, it shows how well that movie is written, and it shows how much time they took into writing a specific movie, right, to be able to watch and not be lost. So I got to give them kudos for that on Blade Runner 2049. The Creator, we talked about that as well, one of my favorite sci-fi movies. Didn't do quite well at the box office because it wasn't marketed properly, but the movie holds up. I've heard people tell me that is the best sci-fi movie they've seen in the last decade. So The Creator, everybody needs to go watch that. Great movie as well, and that's probably the most recent big sci-fi movie that's come out. Oblivion with Tom Cruise, another great sci-fi movie. Crazy plot twist in that movie towards about, I want to say, 3/4 quarter into that movie. Great movie, though, Oblivion. War of the Worlds, Tom Cruise again. A lot of people remember that one, and that's actually, funny enough, a remake as well. But yeah, War of the Worlds, and then 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. I think that movie, I believe it came out late 60s, really a trampoline for ideas visually with sci-fi movies going on after that. I wasn't a fan necessarily of the writing in that movie with Kubrick, but I think Kubrick really gets a lot of props for the way he shoots movies and his vision. So I give him props for that, but I think those were a few that just stood out to me. Running through that really quickly, I'll go on to Buttons here. Does she have a list for us? What you got?
All right. So, I mean, obviously sci-fi, it's science fiction. I mean, I think everybody can kind of throw a lot of different movies into this category and defend them as far as, being within that genre. I think that some of my favorites are definitely going to be either ones that really made me think, like really questioned, like my sense of reality or my sense of like just what the future may hold. And I mean, those are going to be movies like, I, Robot and, The Abyss and, what was it? Inception, Vanilla Sky. I mean, those kind of movies, 12 Monkeys, those really kind of, go into this whole possibility, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I mean, they make you question reality as we know it. And then, of course, I've got like more of my, horror-related sci-fi. So you got like Aliens and those kind of things where it's like, okay, there's a monster or there's a, a big epic space whatever. And I mean, those ones are always just kind of more, I'm looking for that type of movie in that moment. But I mean, of course, you got the good ones like Fifth Element. Those ones are just like fun, all around well balanced movie. It's got a little bit of everything for everyone. Shout out to Kage here because he probably knows Akira. So that one is going to be a little bit unique in the sense of it's set in a future setting, kind of like Blade Runner is set in the future setting. But it's definitely one that not a lot of people are going to have access to it unless they already knew about it. It's from the 80s, late 80s, but it's a animation from Japan, out of Japan, that one. And so I came to it much later in life. I wasn't one I grew up with. But as I got into anime and that kind of genre, that's where I found that movie. But, also I like the new Planet of the Apes movies. I'm excited about getting to see the new one that's coming out later this year. And so I think that kind of rounds off my list pretty well. I mean, give me something in space like Life, where there's an alien creature that's slowly destroying everything, or a robot that's gonna, I think Mother was one that Netflix put out, and that one was well done too. I think that's probably a lot of my sci-fi films that I like. Kage?
Yeah, so both of you touched on some films that I had on my list, as well as movies that I mentioned on our last episode. Independence Day is a big one. Fifth Element, that you said, Buttons, that's pretty iconic. Matrix, Dune, don't really need to go too much into either of those. We've talked about those quite a bit recently. Terminator 2 is iconic. I will still watch that film going to the lava to this day. It's just badass. And when he answers the phone as John Connor's mom, or like as John, you know what I mean? Like I was just like, oh my God, just those iconic scenes. That's what sticks out to me, and that's why they're my favorite. Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise. Oh, yeah. I love that.
I own that one.
It's so good. Yeah, I really enjoyed that one. Inception, Transcendence. Not sure if anyone's seen that one with Johnny Depp.
What was it? What was the premise of that one? I mean, it sounds familiar, but
it is. We have seen movies, sci-fi movies, Terminator and Matrix, that talk about what would happen if AI rose against us. We think of machines enslaving, killing humans because they become self-aware, blah, blah, blah. Transcendence is a different type of movie based on AI being taken really, really, really far. Okay, and taking over the world, but in a different way. And it really begs the question, especially now as it relates to modern times, is how far do we let AI go? How much do we let it impact? We have problems in the video game industry and the movie industry now with the recent strike, talking about using AI voices or AI actors, and the real actors not getting credit where credit is due. We talk about things of that nature, but Transcendence is talking about using AI in all sorts of ways, in medicinal ways, construction, all kinds of things. And this movie touches on that very concept of what happens, how far do we let it go, and what happens when we let it go too far. What are the consequences of that? So Buttons, like you said, you talked about your sci-fi movies, and I agree with this 100%. Sci-fi movies that really make you think about life, about the deep things that really stick with you after the credits roll. And it's interesting to see sci-fi movies like that. And as time progresses, we're seeing some of that. Yeah. It may not be that hyper. We're not seeing flying cars yet. Shout out to Elon Musk. Well, my flying car, but yeah, like I think that is a really up there movie. I highly recommend it. I found it on YouTube, actually. Transcendence, starring Johnny Depp. Go check that out. Another movie that I don't hear too many people talking about is Alita Battle Angel.
Oh, yes.
That movie is fantastic. I own it. It is just a damn good time, and they're making a part 2.
They did do very well on the graphics of that one. I watched it when it first came out as well, and I agree with you, Kage. And talking about transcendence reminded me of another one that also talks about pushing the boundaries, and would have been on my list if I had remembered it at the time. Gattaca. So Gattaca was another one that touches a lot on those same elements as well. And of course, I could think of probably 20 to 30 different movies that have come out in the last 20 years that touch on how far do we take things. Movies like Splice and what was the Species and just all of these. Or not Species. What was the one where they created that little girl?
Splice.
Was that one Splice?
That's Splice, yeah. Species, Species
was
they
the
did
alien.
create the girl, but she was like an alien.
Yeah,
but
she was like alien
but it looked
DNA.
like a girl, right?
It was like alien
right, they were
DNA
messing
put
with DNA. It's
together,
almost
yeah.
like the inspiration behind Splice, right?
Yeah, right.
Similar.
One was an alien, one was created in a lab.
Yeah,
Right.
I think Species was the alien one. Splice was like genetics, like other animals.
Yeah, well,
and
yeah,
stuff.
that it
Right.
had elements from other animals.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, but
Yep.
yeah, that one was creepy as heck, especially at the end. But, yeah. So I mean, I think that again, with sci-fi movies, we can probably pull up. I mean, going all the way back to like some of the old movies that school that we watched in school probably. And then again, I don't know everybody saw it, but maybe you guys remember the one where they shrunk themselves down and
Honey,
then
I
went.
Shrunk the Kids?
No. Well, oh, okay. So, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids was a good
I wasn't
time
even
when I
being
was
funny,
a
like, that
kid.
was the first thing that popped in my
No. But no, this one was they went inside a guy's body to.
Sounds like Magic School Bus.
No.
We're just
Anyway.
going down.
Magic
I didn't
School
realize how
Bus.
many Shrunk movies.
Not to cut you guys off, let me correct myself. So Nolan used CG for the black hole for Interstellar, right? And a couple other elements, the waves and the planet. If you've seen Interstellar, you know what I'm talking about. He didn't use green screen. So that's what it was. Use CG, no green screen. Excuse me for that mistake there. But what were you saying, Buttons? Did you figure out?
Fantastic Voyage.
Okay.
Okay, so it's basically it was one we watched when I was in school. I think either middle school. I think it was middle school. But basically, this one's an old 1966 movie. I mean, but it's the same. I want to say.
When I hear Fantastic Voyage, I think of that song.
But basically, it's hey, maybe
Fantastic
magic.
Voyage.
Maybe this is where Magic School Bus got
Its
its origins,
inspiration.
right?
Ew.
But like I said, I want to say that this film, the writer of what it was based off of, also wrote several other science fiction books that they ended up making into movies later on.
Interesting.
But Fantastic Voyage is definitely one of those ones that is so dated and yet it's so well written that it's still, if you can take into account and just kind of overlook how dated it looks when you're watching it, but just listen to the story and the writing, it's a wonderfully told story, regardless of the fact that it looks super fake.
Interesting. Next topic I wanted to touch on, comparisons between sci-fi movies now and present present sci-fi movies and then past ones. What do you think, if you were to compare, what do you think the major differences are? Budgets?
I think graphics would have to be.
So
Yeah.
visuals and budgets?
Visuals.
Wow.
We have you got to think we had technological limitations at the time.
Right.
Now that didn't stop movies from being blockbusters. I mean, case in point, they were doing a lot of practical stuff with Star Wars back then. I think that's probably the example. But yeah, I think that's it. The visuals right there. When
It's the standout. It's the first thing you're actually seeing.
right. Go back and watch Star Wars then, and go back and watch Star Wars now with lightsabers. You can
Right.
definitely notice. I'm not saying it's bad, but you can definitely notice the difference. Terminator 1, Terminator 2. People unanimously hate Terminator 1. Go watch a YouTube video of the Terminator walking. There's a short little clip. It looks horrendous.
Would you say that overall the sci-fi movies now are of better quality, aside from visuals, than the older ones? Or do you think there was more just original groundbreaking stories in the older films? And now you're kind of seeing, like we talked about, with a lack of ideas, they just kind of leech onto an old idea, throw some newer visuals on it, cooler visuals on it, and say, hey, here you go watch it.
Well, I mean, to be fair, graphics does make a big difference for a lot of people. A lot
Right.
of viewers are going to sit down. I mean, back in the 50s, when you're sitting down watching a creature feature and you can see, the lines and the arms and things like that of people trying to control these, they zoom out and you can see Godzilla literally stomping across a very obviously fake city, because it's a guy in a suit, and it's like, oh, I'm tossing and crushing these cardboard, buildings. And I mean, obviously back then they were like more into the story. They were like, hey, yeah, we know you're not going to destroy all these buildings in real life. So we can just imagine in our head it's a real city that this guy is just, oh God, how awful would that have been? Cut to somebody on the street, Godzilla, and I mean, we can kind of sit there and go, okay, most of these movies that had limited visual effects, they counted and relied more on the actors and the setting to actually scare your audience or to make them believe that it's really what's happening as it's unfolding on the screen. But what we have today, we have CGI, which can have the opposite effect. If you don't have enough practical effects and you don't have like actual settings, you're like, oh, I'm in a big field, but I can tell it's green screen. That's going to hurt you as well, because audience are like, I can tell the difference between green screen and an actual field. Like, I'm not that stupid, and I can film in 4K, off of my cell phone, so I know what looks real and what looks fake. So I think that as far as the story goes, they're looking for a harmony, a balance between special effects as well as story writing. Because if you want just a crappy story, you go watch an action film where everything's exploding and blowing up, and there's no need for a real good story or even real good actors. But I feel like a sci-fi one, what makes them more believable, apart from our like B-rated movies that you're going to watch on the Sci-Fi channel, which those ones, they don't have the budget. I'm sorry, Sci-Fi. I know you're trying. I know you're trying. You guys put out a few good gems every once in a while, but most of them kind of end up looking more like Sharknado. So, for as far as the past goes, we want to see that improvement over time on the graphics qualities, but the story, that's where it's really got to hit. It's really got to have an engaging story. And I mean, most of those stories, I would say, fall in line with some kind of book. All the ones that I can think of that I've really enjoyed over the years fall from a book. So Jurassic Park. That's Michael Crichton, I believe. Yeah,
I feel bad. We're totally butchering this, everybody.
Yeah, right. Sorry. And then the same guy who did I Am Legend, and I believe he also did AI.
Maybe.
Or I Robot. Excuse me, I Robot. I believe he did I Robot as well. But these are all great books that they made into movies, and I think that really helped them be great movies. And every so often you get a little off-the-wall gem.
Yeah, I think the American audience has been conditioned to seeing sci-fi movies and seeing so many sci-fi movies. So now if they see a trailer for a new sci-fi movie, they're not really feeling the need to get up off their couch to go watch that. Especially, we talked about the accessibility to having streaming services. They say, oh, am I going to go pay $30 for that? I've seen this movie before, and that's why I say I don't think the creator did as well, because people are conditioned to seeing these type of movies, right? And it's like the movie's great, but if you don't go actually see it, you're not gonna know, right? And then also too, it goes into how much of this movie was marketed. I also think that sci-fi movies, they almost need a A-list huge actor to be in it to get people to actually go watch it. Unfortunately, before you didn't really need that. You just needed a good story, decent trailer, didn't show too much details of what was going to happen in the movie. Maybe you have kind of like that gimmick of having a big director on there, and people are going to go watch it. But now that doesn't work anymore. We've seen Steven Spielberg movies come out, his name plastered all over them, and they don't perform. I think Super 8, I don't think that performed that well. I don't know if that was a blockbuster.
I mean, I could look it up
enjoyed
real
it.
quick, but yeah,
I
I,
know what
thought
you're-
the
That's
story
just
was
one. I
good.
think Ready Player One, did Ready Player One, was it a
It
blockbuster?
It did well. Ready Player
They're
One.
Right,
working
so
on part
like
two, I think.
it works here and there, but I just don't think you're seeing that on a major level. What you got, Kage?
One thing when Buttons was talking, we were talking about special effects. I feel like sci-fi may be the genre that benefits from excessive CG. Because think about it. If we're talking about aliens, if we're talking about sci-fi horror, monsters, or whatever, like you want to do as much practical as you can. But I feel like out of all the genres, film genres, sci-fi benefits the most from special effects.
Interesting. And so next topic, studios taking chances. Do you think studios are afraid to take chances on these new sci-fi ideas that they have, or you think they rather, what we talked about before, leech onto an idea that kind of has a following already? Or maybe something that's been around. Oh, there was a book that someone didn't touch on. We think this could make a good adaptation, and they go with that, rather than take an idea from a group of people that have come up with something new. They don't want to invest that $250 into it because, like we said, and Kage said it, relying heavily on special effects and visual effects, that costs a lot of money. You know what I mean? So what do you guys think? You think studios shy away from new ideas, or do you think they kind of want to fund some new ideas?
Yeah, I mean, this is just my opinion, but I feel like they should invest in new ideas. Invest your money in writers.
Yeah.
And because again, it is so easy. It is too easy to just latch on to a story that already exists. Let's make another Fast and Furious movie. Let's make another Matrix movie. Let's make another John Wick or whatever. Like, I know those are different genres, but I'm just speaking generally like, it's so easy to just tack on part 6, part 7. And it's like, Hollywood, be brave. Be brave. Actually sit down and make a story. Invest money in your writers. And I promise you, let the story sell it, and everything will go with it.
Right,
Like, I
and
feel
then
like
on
it's the
top, if
foundation.
they don't do that, you'll never have a crop of new trilogies or just new things that you could just bring to the forefront, right? You'll still be trying to pull from the past, and that's only going to work for so long. Buttons, you had some good information for me on Super 8.
Right. So I did look up the box office numbers for Super 8. So that one had a budget of about 45 to 50 million, and it ended up grossing closer to 250, 260.
So yeah, it's a success. Spielberg was a producer, correct?
Yeah.
right.
Spielberg was a producer, and for Ready Player One, it didn't do as well. I think it had about the same
3X?
amount.
3X?
Well, I think they spent a little bit more on the making of that one,
Right.
and it pulled in pretty close to the same numbers.
I wonder now, we talked about Super 8 and that did well, and the funny thing is Spielberg attached to it, right?
Now, something I think that it made me think of a movie as we were talking about budgets and that, and I kind of touched a little bit on, we've all touched on the fact that horror typically has a much smaller budget, and they tend to make a lot of money, but Hollywood has always thrown tons of money at these low budget films, hoping for just those diamond in a rough, they're going to make a ton of money. But it made me think of the funny trope that they have as far as these sci-fi features and these, even the horror flicks and things that they have that come out, which are just these god awful, B-C rated movies, no name actors and actresses just making several sequels to the same movie. And one of my favorite shows, Big Bang Theory, talked about, Penny, she did like this horror movie where she turns into like an ape or something, and it was like Killer Apes or something weird like that. And it just is like one of those funny, things where it's like, hey, you take an actor and an actress that have kind of died off, and then they get attached to like a good horror movie, and it's kind of like their reintroduction back into cinema to do like one of these horror films. Drew Barrymore did it. I mean, I'm sure if you looked it up, there's a ton of actors and actresses that have done that. They go back to a horror movie and then they're like, hey, I'm hot again. I can now get some better roles. But Bowfinger sticks out to me as like the perfect example. And so does like Get Shorty. It's just one of those movies where, it's making fun of cinema. It's making fun of Hollywood. They're like, oh yeah, pitch me an idea. Like, pitch me an idea for a movie. And it's all like, all right, imagine this, space, right? And it's like, that's the pitch. And it's like, that's not an actual plot. Like, give me more. Okay, so it's this guy, and he's been abducted by aliens, right? Or whatever. And it's like, you go into this whole long spiel of these people who are paid to pitch movie ideas to these studios and to these producers, based off of maybe a crappy script, where it's like, they're just taking the idea. They're like, the premise of this is great. Now go write it. And you end up with these either really good movies or these movies that are just kind of half-baked. So I think, I would not be surprised if you were to tell me that for every one good movie that we can think of as far as a horror movie or a sci-fi movie, there's like 10 others that are complete garbage that some studio has produced, or maybe smaller studios and even big studios, and they were like, man, we're going to make a lot of money off of these, and that's why we're funding it, or we're hoping that it'll just get our foot in the door to these studios, and then they'll produce and put more money behind our projects if they do well enough, and then we can get a bigger budget and go for a bigger payday.
Makes sense. What do you guys have as the most impactful sci-fi films to you guys?
Ooh. I would say for me right now, Matrix and Terminator are pretty big. I feel like the big AI movies, I think they're going to continue to be big, just again, because as it relates to the times that we're in with AI and the recent actors writing strike that we had, I feel like those are really iconic. Fifth Element, Starship Troopers, those are very iconic films. I'd say probably more so Fifth Element. I think that's part of pop culture at this point. You still got cosplay going on of women cosplaying as Lilo, right? And saying Lilu, sorry. And with the multi-pass. Give me a multi-pass buttons. Sorry. But like, yeah, just things like that are gonna either stick with us or inspire future films.
Interesting. I'd probably throw Star Wars up there for me, and then 2001: A Space Odyssey, like I said, just because of the visuals that Kubrick was using in the 1960s. It's really ahead of its time visually. Like I said, in my opinion, the story's not that great, but I was looking at it more from a visual aspect and things that I could take from that, and kind of the underlying premise of the movie. The story is what it is, but the premise and the visuals really stood out to me, and it really catapulted visuals in sci-fi movies leading after that. I also think Aliens was big for that sci-fi horror genre as well. That was a big sci-fi film. But like Kage said, Terminator, of course. I'm really talking about the whole Terminator series itself.
Yeah.
Right? But to me, those were probably the biggest standouts. I think Terminator really kind of turned the corner on the AI aspect, right? Star Wars was the space opera, and then 2001: A Space Odyssey was more philosophical in a sense with the crazy visuals and the way it was shot with Kubrick. But those were a couple for me. What do you got, Buttons?
So, I mean, as far as, sci-fi, it's such a huge expanse. If we're talking about impact for me, there's always going to be like two things that stand out to me as far as from my childhood and just beyond that. And of course, you know, Back to the Future is definitely very impactful. It's a big part. I mean, we talked on some of the other ones I already mentioned, like Planet of the Apes, Gattaca, those ones, things like AI and, iRobot, those all kind of bunch together and kind of show you maybe a premonition of what could happen in the future, especially if you start factoring in some of the newer movies that start to question, like, who, like Her, for example, Her, where the guy like falls in love with this AI, right? And it's like, okay, here's the danger, here's what could happen. I haven't seen Kage, the movie that you were talking about with Johnny Depp. Transcendence. That looks like it's gonna have some of those same elements in it as far as pushing boundaries. Neff, I know we've talked about some TV shows, sci-fi shows and things like that. Black Mirror also love to touch on some what if scenarios, and one of my favorites is from the first season, and it talks about, social media becoming like a new currency. Like, hey, you got to have so many likes. If people don't like you, you can't get into this building. You can't, if you don't trade on this kind of social currency, like, hey, 5 stars, hey, whatever. And you just sit there and you go, okay, wait a minute. So my score on socially acceptable or acceptability has gone so low that now it's impacting my health and my, well-being, basically. Those kind of films and movies that touch on that, those are some of my favorite and most impactful things to me. But even like my comedy ones that I love, like Spaceballs, I mean, it's always going to hold a special little spot in my heart, just because, I'm a Mog. Because that's just great. I'm my own best friend. Introverts everywhere. You're welcome. But yeah, I think if it's gonna be out there and it's going to stick around for several generations, then it's a great series. It's a great show. Aliens has done it. Star Wars has done it. Planet of the Apes has done it. I mean, they keep pumping them out.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of our favorite sci-fi shows. For one, talked about it before. X-Files is up there for me. Yep. Star Trek: Next Generation, right? Really Next Generation, because that was Captain Picard. You know what I mean? It's like the 90s era Star Trek. And I thought that was really well done. I think it's probably the best Star Wars. I think that was at a point where they had everything they needed to get the idea across at a high level. So I really like Star Trek Next Generation. I was actually more into Star Trek Next Generation than I was into the Star Trek movies. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, X-Files.
The old ones or the new ones?
The new and old. I think Star Trek is better as a show. I don't think Star Trek is that good as a movie. It's kind of boring. Like, compared to like Star Wars and the amount of action that's going on, Star Trek's a little different. You know what I mean? But that's just, I guess it just
versus Star Wars, guys.
Yeah,
Here's
it just
the war
depends.
Right here on Popcorn Square. Let's go.
It depends on, I guess, what you like subjectively. But to me, Star Wars had more stuff going on, right? So I just thought I thought that was a little better there. But yeah, Next Generation was great. X-Files, I was just watching some episodes of X-Files. That's great. You know what I mean? So, and that kind of tapped into the suspense, sci-fi, and horror aspect as well. We talked about it. Some of those episodes got kind of dark. You know what I mean? So I think those were two big. Yeah, those were two big sci-fi shows. There's a lot more Stargate, stuff like that. But Kage, what do you got?
So you already mentioned a few. Yeah, back in the day, X-Files. I was a big X-Files fan back in the day. Stargate SG-1, I watched a lot of that. Star Trek, I watched, fun fact, a lot of people don't know this, I was big on Star Trek for a time when I was younger. Next Generation and Deep Space Nine were my my bread and butter right there, just all day. Love that back in the day. Had action figures, toys, ships. Right. So, yeah, I was that kid. Stranger Things on Netflix, that's considered sci-fi. Invader Zim, I'm a big yes. I'm glad somebody knew that. I love Invader Zim, yo.
And I love cupcakes
Yes,
You don't like Gur?
and
What did you-
tacos.
Pizza?
What did you do with the guidey chippy
Pizza?
thing?
Oh, pizza.
He's like, what did you do with the guidey chippy thing? Oh, I left that at home. You left what at home? The guidey chippy thing. He goes, why would you do that? To make room for the tuna. Like he would have a cupcake. Like, I love that show.
Yes.
Another one, Firefly. Big Firefly fan. One season, Joe, who did that? Joss
Whedon?
Whedon, did that. I would love to see.
They did do the movie to end it
yes,
up. To wrap it up because it left on a cliffhanger there. Yeah.
Because it was one season of Firefly, which I own.
Yeah.
And then they had the movie. I can't remember what it was called, but I own that one too.
I'm pretty sure it was called Firefly.
No, well, yeah. It was good. It was good, but I would love to see. I don't know. I'm conflicted. I would love to see Firefly come back, but at the same time, it's been so many years. Can you get Nathan Fillion to come back? I'm pretty sure he would.
Yeah, it just would hit a little bit different because he's
everybody's
so much older.
Right.
I mean, I can tell you right now that I did like Firefly, and I kind of read up a little bit more on like why that series ended and what happened with it, because there were so many people that loved it, really enjoyed it, and then there was so many people who were like, what the hell is this? Why is this such a train wreck of a show? Like that was ultimately why it got canceled. And it's not from the fault of the people who were making it. It was the network, the way they decided to handle it. And they released episodes out of order and just basically shot themselves
A lot of
in
stuff
the
going on
foot.
behind the
Yeah.
scenes.
Yeah.
Any other ones you got on there, Kage?
No, that's pretty much it.
Nice. And before I get to buttons, to follow up on why I said Star Trek works better as a show, because I noticed Star Wars has characters, correct? But really, there's not that many main characters, right? I guess you could say there's a main and then there's characters underneath. And I guess you could argue that they are main in their own sense and own right. But with Star Trek, there's so many characters. And for you to actually expound upon those characters and their backgrounds, you have to have more content. In a movie, you have all these characters, but if you didn't have the shows to lead up to the movie of Star Trek, you wouldn't even know anything about these characters. There's basically be no character development, where Star Wars, you could just do it as a movie, and you don't have to really expound upon Jar Jar Binks' background. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I feel like
Shout out Jar Jar Binks.
right. It's like Jar Jar's there, that's cool, but I don't feel the need to know about where Jar Jar's from.
like Star Wars has a centralized story. It's
Correct.
a big epic space opera, and
Right.
even bigger than that if you consider that all the movies are supposed to tie into each other. Whereas Star Trek is a bunch of other little stories. This episode will be about them visiting this planet. This episode will be
Right.
about this situation, and they might have an
Correct,
story arc for the
correct.
season, stuff like that. But that's why I think that works.
Yeah, I feel like it
I feel like
translates as a
I think
show a
Star
lot
Trek
better.
should, if it stays as a show, that's its happy place.
Yeah. What do you got, Buttons? Your favorite shows?
Okay, well, I mean, I do tend to watch TV shows a little bit more, and of course, I love me some Netflix. So
Let's hear it.
I've got some of the oldies on there, like from when I was younger, like Sliders and Warehouse 13,
Memory
Eureka.
unlocked.
So, those ones are kind of like ones I remember watching. Of course, the ones that you guys mentioned as well would have also been on my list, but I'm not going to mention them because you already did. But some of the newer ones that have come out that I followed, those would have been like The 100, Westworld. Dark is one of those ones that's a foreign, but they went ahead and dubbed it, so you can still watch it. I believe it's German, I think, something like that too.
Interesting. I think we had some good topics there that we hit on, some good movies, good shows. I think that's going to wrap it up for episode 16, folks. We thank you for being here with us. As we always say, like, subscribe, comment, ring the bell for notifications, and please join us for the next episode of the Popcorn Square Podcast. I am Neff.
I'm Kage.
Buttons.
Be safe.